The morning had begun like any other in the city. The streets were buzzing with people hurrying to their destinations. Cars honked impatiently, bicycles weaved through traffic, and the soft sound of children laughing came from the nearby park. In the midst of all this, the tall glass building of Orion Enterprises gleamed under the sunlight. Its reflective windows made it look almost untouchable, like a fortress of power and wealth. Inside, the employees moved with purpose, clutching papers, laptops, and coffee cups. Each person seemed to have their own mission, their own urgency, but none more urgent than the man who carried the title of CEO. The CEO, known for his disciplined nature and keen mind, was always surrounded by a cloud of business matters. Every morning, he arrived at the office before most of his staff, reviewing reports, emails, and schedules before the building even fully woke up. Today, however, he was unusually hurried. His steps echoed through the long hallways as he moved from his private office to the conference room. There was a sense of tension in his movements, a subtle weight in his posture that spoke of responsibilities far beyond the ordinary. In the midst of all this, a tiny, almost imperceptible sound occurred. A small metal object slipped from his pocket. It fell to the floor with a soft clink, landing between the polished tiles. The CEO, already engrossed in reviewing a contract on his tablet, did not notice. The locket, delicate and tarnished slightly with age, lay forgotten, catching the sunlight streaming from the window. Inside it were memories, fragments of a life that had once been filled with laughter, love, and a warmth he now rarely allowed himself to feel. Downstairs, in the maintenance area of the building, Amina, a girl of 12, was helping her father sweep the floor. She had learned from an early age to take pride in her work. Her father, a janitor at Orion Enterprises, was a quiet man who taught her to notice the small things that others often missed. He told her that kindness, honesty, and attention to detail were gifts that could shape a person's life, even if they seemed insignificant. Amina's dark eyes scanned the floor as she moved along with the broom. She was observant, curious, and careful. That was when she noticed something shiny. She bent down and picked up the small locket. It was heavier than it looked, warm from the sun's rays streaming through the windows. Amina turned it over in her hands, noticing the fine engravings and the care with which it had been made. There was a beauty to it that she could not describe, a story locked inside the tiny metal shell. She instinctively knew it did not belong to her or anyone she knew. Holding it carefully, she thought about what she should do. She could leave it where it was, but her father had always told her that honesty mattered more than convenience or fear. Gathering courage, she walked toward the executive offices. The hallways were lined with polished floors and walls that reflected the bright morning light. Employees glanced at her curiously as she passed, some with mild amusement at seeing a young girl in such a serious environment, but most were too busy with their own work to notice. Amina kept her eyes fixed on her goal, returning the lost item to its rightful owner. She clutched the locket tightly, feeling a strange sense of anticipation mixed with nervousness. The CEO had just finished reviewing the contract when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned, slightly irritated by the interruption, only to see a young girl standing there. Her clothes were simple, her hair tied neatly and her eyes wide with a mixture of determination and shyness. In her small hands, she held the locket. "You dropped this, sir," she said clearly, offering it to him. The CEO froze. For a moment he could not speak. The locket in her hand seemed to radiate memories, pulling him back to moments he had long tried to forget. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached for it, and the world around him seemed to pause. The office noises faded. The people moving in the background blurred, and all that remained was the small, precious object and the girl who had returned it to him. Amina noticed the sudden change in his expression. She did not understand why he seemed so affected, but she sensed the gravity of the moment. She waited patiently, her hands still extended, feeling a strange connection to this man she had never met before. There was something unspoken in the air, a quiet intensity that made her heartbeat quicken. She had never seen anyone like this, someone who commanded attention without demanding it, whose presence alone could fill a room with a silent authority. Finally, the CEO spoke, his voice softer than she expected. "Thank you," he said, his eyes still fixed on the locket. There was a weight in his words, a depth of feeling that went beyond mere politeness. He opened the locket carefully, revealing the faded photograph inside. A woman's face, smiling warmly, looked back at him. Memories came rushing in. Morning coffees shared in laughter, quiet conversations by the fireplace, the simple joy of holding hands. He had thought these moments lost forever, buried under the responsibilities and grief that had consumed him. Yet here they were again, brought back by the honesty of a small girl who did not even know the story. Amina watched silently, unsure of how to react. She had returned lost items before, but never had she witnessed such a strong emotional response. She did not speak. She simply observed, sensing that words might break the fragile atmosphere between them. The CEO's eyes glistened slightly, and for a brief moment, he allowed himself to feel the sorrow he had kept hidden for so long. The office around them continued its rhythm, people moving, phones ringing, and computers humming. Yet in that small corner, a quiet human connection had formed. Amina had no idea of the Locket's significance, but she knew she had done the right thing. Her father's lessons about honesty, courage, and kindness seemed alive in that moment, as real as the polished floors under their feet. After a long pause, the CEO gently closed the locket and looked at her with a faint smile. "You have a good heart," he said. The words were simple, but to Amina they felt like a rare gift. She nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She had helped someone, even if she did not fully understand the story behind it. In that instant, she realized that small actions could hold immense power, that even a child could impact the life of someone who seemed untouchable. The CEO set the locket down on his desk, his hands lingering over it as if reluctant to let go. Amina turned to leave, but he called out softly, "Wait." She paused, looking back at him. He gestured for her to sit. She hesitated for a moment, then took a seat across from him. The office, usually a place of deadlines and pressure, had become a quiet space for something entirely different. A moment of reflection, connection, and understanding. For the next several minutes, neither spoke immediately. The CEO stared at the locket, lost in memories, while Amina watched him carefully. She noticed the slight trembling of his hands, the way his eyes softened, and the way the corners of his mouth twitched as though holding back a smile and a tear at the same time. It was a side of him that the world rarely saw. Here, with a child who had returned a lost item, he allowed himself to be human. Finally, he spoke, recounting small stories about the woman in the photograph. He described her laughter, the little quirks she had, and the way she had inspired him to become a better person. Amina listened with rapt attention, fascinated by the love and loss that seemed to radiate from him. She did not interrupt, did not ask questions, but simply listened. Her presence offered him a sense of comfort, a reminder that human connections could heal, even if in small, quiet ways. The moment stretched, unhurried, and profound. In a world that moved quickly and often overlooked the small gestures of kindness, this encounter felt like a pause, a breath of clarity. The CEO realized that the locket was not just an object. It was a symbol of love, memory, and the power of human honesty. Amina realized that her small act had created ripples far beyond her understanding. As the morning sun continued to fill the office with light, the two sat together, connected in a silent understanding that transcended age, position, and circumstance. A young girl, the daughter of a janitor and a powerful CEO, brought together by a tiny piece of metal containing memories of love, had found in each other a brief but meaningful connection. It was a reminder that no matter how busy, how powerful, or how ordinary a day might seem, small acts of courage and honesty could spark moments that change lives forever. And in that quiet, reflective space, the CEO felt something he had not in years: hope. Amina, too, felt the importance of her actions, the significance of returning what was lost, and the incredible weight that a simple act could carry. Neither would ever forget that morning, the moment a child's honesty met a man's grief, and together they shared a connection that was quietly, profoundly human. After that morning, life in the office seemed to carry on as usual. But for the CEO, nothing was really the same. The locket had awakened memories he had long tried to bury, and the image of the young girl who had returned it kept appearing in his mind. He found himself walking past the reception area with a different perspective, noticing small details in the building he had always overlooked. The faint hum of the air conditioning, the distant laughter of children in the park visible from the windows, the way the sunlight reflected off the polished floors. All of it seemed sharper, more meaningful, as if the world had become a little more alive. Meanwhile, Amina returned home, her heart still beating fast from the encounter. She could not stop thinking about the man with the locket, the way his eyes had softened, the gentle voice he had used when he thanked her. She shared the story with her father over dinner, describing in vivid detail the glimmering locket, the photograph inside, and the sudden hush that had seemed to fall over the office. Her father listened quietly, nodding, proud of her honesty and bravery. He reminded her that sometimes doing the right thing did not come with recognition or reward, but it could touch hearts in ways no one could predict. The CEO, on the other hand, had begun a quiet routine. Each morning he would arrive at the office early, but instead of immediately diving into work, he would take a few minutes to stand by his window, holding the locket and looking at the city below. He thought about his wife, the life they had shared, and the empty space she had left behind. The locket, though small, seemed to carry the essence of her presence. He had forgotten how much a single object could remind someone of love, loss, and connection. It was strange, he realized, how one small act, a lost item returned by a child, could stir emotions that had been buried for years. Amina's days also took on a subtle shift. She continued helping her father in the office, sweeping floors, dusting windows, and ensuring that every corner was clean. But now she walked with a sense of purpose beyond her chores. She carried the memory of the CEO's gratitude with her, a quiet spark that made her feel that even small actions mattered. She noticed people more, listened to their stories, and offered help wherever she could. Little by little, she became known among the staff not just as the janitor's daughter, but as someone thoughtful and observant, someone who could be trusted to do what was right. Back in his office, the CEO could not shake the feeling that life had presented him with an opportunity. The locket had brought a flood of memories, yes, but it had also introduced him to Amina, a young girl who reminded him that goodness existed in the simplest forms. He started noticing other small acts around him, the receptionist holding the door for a colleague, the mailroom staff laughing quietly as they shared a moment, the security guard nodding politely to every passerby. It was as if the locket had opened his eyes to a world he had long ignored, a world filled with unnoticed kindness and unspoken stories. One afternoon, as he sat at his desk reviewing reports, a thought struck him. He had the means to make a difference in the lives of people like Amina and her father, but he had always kept a distance. Wealth and power had created walls, invisible and strong around him. He realized that these walls had not protected him. They had only isolated him. The return of the locket and the courage of a child had begun to crack those walls. A new determination began to form inside him, a quiet resolve to act, to help, to connect with people in a genuine human way. Amina, too, was learning about the impact of small gestures. One day, while walking down the hallway with her father, she noticed a man drop a folder full of papers. Without hesitation, she picked it up and returned it to him. The man's eyes lit up and he thanked her warmly. It was a simple exchange, yet it made Amina feel the same sense of purpose she had felt when she returned the locket. She began to understand that kindness, honesty, and courage were not just abstract concepts. They were actions that could ripple through the lives of others, sometimes in ways one could never imagine. As the days passed, the CEO began to look for opportunities to quietly support Amina and her father. He instructed his staff to ensure her father's work was recognized and considered ways to help Amina with her studies. Though he kept his involvement subtle, he did not want to create attention or make them feel indebted. He simply wanted to honor the honesty and courage that had touched him so deeply. His own grief had softened, replaced by a sense of purpose he had not felt in years. The act of giving, of helping quietly, became a source of healing, a bridge between past sorrow and present hope. Amina continued to grow in confidence. She took on small responsibilities in her father's work, helping him organize supplies and learn new skills. She shared stories of her day with him, describing encounters with office staff, observations she had made, and lessons she was learning about kindness. Her father listened with pride, silently acknowledging that his teachings were taking root. The connection between father and daughter strengthened, and Amina's sense of empathy deepened. She was becoming someone who could navigate the world with integrity, just as her father had hoped. The CEO, watching all of this unfold from his office, felt a renewed sense of purpose. He began attending to matters not only of business but of human connection. Meetings became more than transactions. They became moments to understand, to listen, to encourage. He noticed employees' efforts, gave credit where it was due, and quietly supported initiatives that promoted fairness and kindness. The office atmosphere shifted subtly, a reflection of the CEO's internal transformation. The building that had once seemed cold and imposing now carried a warmth, a sense of shared humanity that no report or contract could convey. One evening, after a long day, the CEO sat alone in his office, holding the locket again. Memories of his wife returned, but this time, they were not accompanied by grief alone. There was gratitude, too. Gratitude for having experienced love, for having been reminded of human goodness, and for the small girl who had unknowingly changed the course of his life. He realized that life had a way of presenting lessons in the most unexpected forms. A lost locket, returned by a child, had reminded him of what truly mattered: love, honesty, kindness, and the courage to connect with others. Amina, meanwhile, lay in bed that night, thinking about the CEO and the locket. She wondered about the woman in the photograph, about the stories behind it, and about the strange way life sometimes created connections. She felt a quiet sense of pride in herself, knowing that her simple act had made a difference. She understood that courage and honesty were not about grand gestures, but about noticing what needed to be done and acting without fear. The lessons her father had taught her were alive in that moment, shaping the person she was becoming. The days turned into weeks, but the impact of that morning lingered. The CEO continued to find ways to quietly support the janitor and his daughter, ensuring they had opportunities they might never have expected. Amina grew more confident and compassionate, her small acts of kindness continuing to ripple through the office. And through it all, the locket remained a symbol, not just of love lost, but of connection regained, of human goodness recognized, and of the quiet power of integrity. In this unfolding story, two lives, one of privilege and one of humility, were intertwined by a small, simple act. Amina had returned a locket, but in doing so she had unlocked a world of emotions, reflection, and purpose for a man who had long thought himself beyond the reach of such moments. The CEO had been reminded that life was not only about power, wealth, or success. It was about connection, kindness, and the courage to act with honesty. And together, through a shared moment of human understanding, they had begun a journey that would change both of their lives in ways neither could have anticipated. Even as the city continued to hum with its usual energy, and the office carried on with its daily rhythm, a quiet story of courage, honesty, and human connection was unfolding inside. A small girl and a powerful man had discovered that sometimes the simplest gestures could carry the heaviest meaning, and that even the smallest person could have an impact that reaches far beyond their imagination. After the morning when Amina had returned the locket, the days seemed to flow gently, yet the impact of that brief encounter continued to ripple through the lives of both the CEO and the young girl. The office carried on with its usual rhythm: meetings, phone calls, and emails. But underneath the polished floors and glass walls, something subtle was shifting. There was a quiet energy, almost imperceptible, that seemed to linger whenever Amina passed through the hallways. People noticed her presence not because of grandeur or titles, but because of a warmth she carried naturally, a kind of honesty that could not be ignored. For the CEO, every glance at the locket brought both sorrow and reflection. The photograph of his late wife, smiling with a serenity that had comforted him in countless moments, reminded him not only of love lost, but also of love given and received. He had spent years building walls around himself, believing that power, wealth, and discipline could fill the emptiness he felt. Yet the simplicity of a child's courage, the act of returning a lost item, had begun to teach him something he had long forgotten: that life's most profound moments often came not from grand gestures but from small, sincere acts. One afternoon, as he sat at his desk reviewing reports, his mind wandered from financial statements to the events that had brought him to this point. He thought about Amina, about her courage, and about the innocence she carried. He remembered the way she had looked at him with her wide, honest eyes, offering the locket without hesitation or expectation. There had been no sense of duty, no desire for reward, only the pure intention of returning what was lost. That was something he realized he had long forgotten in his own life. Amina, too, found herself thinking about the CEO more often than she expected. At school and at home, she would recall his gentle words, the subtle emotion in his eyes, and the way he had allowed himself to be vulnerable, even briefly, in her presence. She began to notice the small kindnesses around her, the people who helped without being asked, and the quiet ways her father worked to make their lives better, despite limited resources. She felt a growing sense of purpose, realizing that honesty and courage were not just virtues to aspire to. They were actions that could shape the world in ways both visible and unseen. The CEO started paying closer attention to his office staff, noticing the little things that often went overlooked. He observed the receptionist who always greeted visitors with a warm smile despite exhaustion, the security guard, who patiently assisted people without complaint, and the mailroom staff, whose laughter filled the otherwise quiet hallways. He began acknowledging their efforts, offering words of appreciation, sometimes quietly, sometimes more publicly. There was a change in his demeanor, a softness that had not been there before, and people around him began to sense it, even if they did not fully understand why. One day, the CEO decided to act on a small idea that had been forming in his mind. He wanted to recognize Amina's father for his hard work, ensuring that he received proper acknowledgement within the company. Without making a scene, he arranged for a formal commendation accompanied by a small bonus that reflected both appreciation and support. It was not just a reward for the work itself, but also a subtle nod to the values he had come to respect in the janitor and his daughter: honesty, diligence, and integrity. When Amina's father received the commendation, he was speechless. He had worked quietly for years, never expecting recognition or praise. Yet here it was, offered with sincerity and discretion, a validation of his efforts that filled him with pride and humility simultaneously. He shared the news with Amina that evening, his eyes shining as he explained how even the smallest acts of integrity could lead to unexpected rewards. Amina listened, her own eyes wide with wonder, understanding for the first time that the world could respond to goodness in ways she had not imagined. As the days passed, the CEO began to find subtle ways to help Amina as well. He arranged for additional educational resources, scholarships, and tutoring opportunities, all provided quietly, without drawing attention. He wanted her to feel supported, not singled out, and to understand that her courage and honesty were valued. Amina noticed changes in her daily life. The books, materials, and opportunities that had once seemed out of reach now became accessible. Yet she never suspected who had orchestrated it. She simply felt a quiet sense of gratitude, knowing that someone cared enough to provide help without making a spectacle of it. One morning, while walking through the office, Amina noticed a group of employees huddled around a large project board, discussing strategies and ideas. She watched quietly, fascinated by their collaboration, and remembered the lessons her father had taught her: observation, understanding, and learning from those around you. She realized that there was more to the world than chores, school, and small routines. There was a vast tapestry of human effort, connection, and ambition waiting to be understood. She absorbed every detail, every gesture, and every word, knowing that these observations would shape the way she approached life in the future. The CEO, meanwhile, continued to reflect on his own path. The Locket had stirred memories of love, yes, but also of mistakes, regrets, and missed opportunities. He thought about the years he had spent chasing success, often at the expense of personal connections. He realized that the walls he had built around himself, walls of wealth, power, and discipline, had isolated him not only from the world but also from his own emotions. Yet now, through the simple act of a child's honesty, he felt those walls beginning to crumble, replaced by a desire to reconnect, to give, and to nurture the goodness he had once taken for granted. Amina's father began noticing subtle changes in the CEO's behavior as well. On the rare occasions when their paths crossed, he observed a gentleness, a willingness to engage, and a quiet respect that had not been there before. He mentioned it to Amina one evening, telling her that sometimes even powerful people could change when reminded of the simple truths of life. Amina listened, smiling, understanding that her own actions, though small, had contributed to something larger than she had imagined. The bond between Amina and the CEO, though not yet fully realized, was slowly forming through these quiet interactions and unseen gestures. The CEO thought about her often, wondering how such a small person could carry such a significant impact. He marveled at her honesty, her courage, and the simple wisdom she had learned from her father. In her, he saw a reflection of values he had admired in his wife: integrity, empathy, and the ability to act without expectation of reward. One evening, after a particularly long day, the CEO found himself sitting alone with the Locket once more. Memories of his wife returned, sharp and vivid, yet now accompanied by a sense of hope. He thought about Amina, about her courage, and about the ways in which her small act had transformed his understanding of human connection. He realized that life often presented lessons in unexpected forms, and that the simplest gestures, returning a lost item, speaking a kind word, offering help, could have profound consequences. Amina, too, reflected on her experiences. She walked home from the office one evening, her mind filled with the stories of the people she had observed, the kindness she had witnessed, and the small ways in which she could make a difference. She remembered the CEO's words, his gratitude, and the subtle power of returning the Locket. She felt a sense of responsibility, understanding that her actions mattered and that even small, honest deeds could shape lives in ways beyond imagination. The days and weeks that followed were filled with quiet growth. Amina's confidence expanded, her awareness of the world deepened, and her sense of purpose strengthened. The CEO, too, found himself slowly transforming, learning to value human connection over cold efficiency, to notice the efforts of those around him, and to act with empathy and discretion. The office, once a place of purely business interactions, began to carry an undercurrent of warmth and humanity, a subtle reflection of the internal changes taking place within its most powerful inhabitant. One afternoon, a small incident occurred that highlighted the shift in their lives. A delivery man dropped a stack of envelopes, scattering them across the polished floor. Amina rushed forward without hesitation, picking them up and returning them to him with a polite smile. The man thanked her warmly, his eyes crinkling with genuine appreciation. In that simple act, Amina saw a reflection of the same courage and honesty she had displayed when returning the Locket. She understood that the ripple effect of kindness could spread endlessly, touching lives in ways one could not always see. Meanwhile, the CEO watched these subtle changes with quiet satisfaction. He observed the little interactions, the unnoticed acts of honesty, and the genuine efforts of people to help one another. He began to incorporate these observations into his own life, seeking ways to encourage, support, and mentor quietly. The Locket, once a symbol of personal loss, had become a reminder of the enduring power of human integrity, and Amina, unwittingly, had become a catalyst for this transformation. Through it all, the CEO and Amina's lives continued to intertwine in quiet, unseen ways. He supported her and her father without fanfare. She acted with honesty and courage without expectation, and together, through small, meaningful actions, they began to shape a shared story of trust, respect, and connection. Both of them were learning, growing, and discovering that life's true richness lay not in power or wealth, but in the relationships formed, the kindness extended, and the courage to act rightly even in the smallest of ways. And so, the story continued to unfold quietly, humanely, and profoundly. A small child's honesty had touched the life of a powerful man, awakening memories, stirring emotions, and inspiring actions that would ripple outward in countless directions. In turn, the CEO's quiet support offered Amina a glimpse of hope, opportunity, and the enduring significance of her own courage. Together, though unaware of the full scope, they were beginning a journey that would change both of their lives forever, one small, meaningful step at a time. The days after the initial encounter had passed, but the quiet changes that had begun in both the CEO's life and Amina's continued to grow. The office, usually a place of rigid schedules and strict protocols, now carried a subtle warmth. People noticed small acts of kindness, the way doors were held, smiles exchanged, and help offered without expectation. It was as if a gentle ripple had spread from that one moment when a small girl returned a lost locket, touching more lives than anyone could have anticipated. For the CEO, the impact was deeply personal. Each day, he found himself reflecting not on profits, reports, or deadlines, but on human connections. The locket resting quietly on his desk had become more than a memory of a beloved wife. It was a reminder of trust, honesty, and the courage it took to do the right thing. He remembered Amina's small hands holding the delicate object, her eyes steady and unafraid, and he realized how often in life, people overlooked the importance of such simple acts. That morning had awakened something in him that no meeting or report ever could. a desire to act with compassion and purpose. He began to notice the small struggles of those around him. A secretary juggling work and family responsibilities, a junior employee quietly trying to learn and improve, and even the janitorial staff who worked tirelessly to keep the office clean. He realized that recognition, encouragement, and support could change lives in ways far beyond any financial incentive. So quietly and thoughtfully, he started taking steps to help. Not in grand displays, but in small, deliberate ways that reflected respect and care. One morning, he asked his assistant to arrange a subtle surprise for Amina's family. Without revealing his involvement, he ensured that her father's position was acknowledged, providing him with a promotion and additional support for his work. He also arranged tutoring and educational materials for Amina, ensuring she could explore her talents and continue her learning without financial barriers. It was his way of quietly honoring the honesty, courage, and integrity that had touched him so deeply. Amina, meanwhile, began to notice subtle changes in her life. Her father came home one evening, glowing with quiet pride, and shared the news of recognition from the company. Though he did not reveal the source, he explained to Amina that honesty and hard work always mattered, and that sometimes life had ways of rewarding those who did good without expectation. Amina listened carefully, feeling a warmth in her heart. She realized that the courage it took to return the locket had not only made a difference for the CEO, but it also brought unexpected changes to her own life. At school, Amina's confidence began to grow as well. She approached learning with a new sense of curiosity, took initiative in projects, and helped her classmates with tasks without seeking acknowledgement. Teachers noticed her diligence and kindness, praising her for both her intelligence and her generosity of spirit. Amina felt proud but never boastful. She understood deeply that the rewards of honest action were not always immediate or visible, yet they were meaningful in ways that went beyond recognition or praise. The CEO, on his part, began incorporating these lessons into his leadership style. He paid more attention to his employees, offering words of encouragement, checking in on their well-being, and recognizing efforts that often went unnoticed. Meetings became more than transactions. They became moments of listening, mentoring, and understanding. The office atmosphere shifted, subtly but significantly, from one of strict efficiency to one where human connection mattered. Employees began to notice the change, feeling seen and valued in ways that made them more engaged and motivated. One afternoon, Amina wandered into the office hallway, delivering supplies for her father. She noticed the way people treated her differently, polite, respectful, and with a warmth that had not been there before. She did not understand the full reason, but she sensed that her small act of returning the locket had begun a chain of kindness that extended beyond her imagination. She smiled to herself, feeling both humility and pride, understanding that her courage had created ripples far larger than she could see. The CEO continued to reflect on the lessons that Amina had unintentionally taught him. He thought about the walls he had built around himself over the years, walls of wealth, power, and discipline. Those walls had kept him safe, but they had also isolated him from the world and from the depth of his own emotions. The encounter with Amina had begun to break those walls, allowing him to reconnect with his empathy, his capacity to care, and the human connections that had always been at the heart of a meaningful life. One day, he decided to take a further step. He invited Amina's father for a quiet meeting in his office, not to boast or display authority, but simply to speak with him as a person. The janitor entered, nervous and unsure, expecting perhaps formalities or instructions. Instead, he was greeted warmly, his efforts acknowledged sincerely, and his perspective respected. The CEO spoke of his admiration for the father's diligence and integrity, and how those qualities had clearly been passed on to Amina. The janitor left the meeting feeling a sense of pride and encouragement he had rarely experienced. Amina, unaware of the meeting, continued her daily routine, observing people and learning from small interactions. She noticed the CEO more often now, glimpsing him in moments of thought or quiet observation, seeing the subtle warmth that had replaced the cold formality she had once expected. She felt a connection, though undefined, recognizing in him a human side that mirrored some of the lessons her father had taught her: integrity, honesty, and quiet courage. The CEO also began thinking about how to honor his late wife's memory in meaningful ways. He realized that she had always valued human connection, kindness, and empathy more than wealth or success. The locket had reminded him of that. He decided to use his position to support others quietly, just as he had begun supporting Amina and her father. Educational programs, mentorship opportunities, and subtle acts of encouragement became his focus. He wanted to create a legacy of kindness and connection, a way to honor love and integrity in every interaction. Weeks passed, and the office continued its subtle transformation. Amina's presence, her courage, and her honesty remained a quiet but powerful influence. Employees, inspired by small gestures, began acting with more consideration toward each other. The CEO's example, combined with the ripple of Amina's actions, created a culture of empathy that extended beyond protocols and procedures. Small acts of support became normalized, and people felt more connected, more respected, and more motivated to act with care and integrity. Amina's father noticed the changes as well. His work remained the same in its responsibilities, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose and pride. He spoke often to Amina about the importance of humility, courage, and honesty, emphasizing that small actions could ripple outward, influencing lives in ways one could not always predict. Amina absorbed these lessons, feeling empowered by the tangible effects of her own courage. She realized that the world was a complex place, but that goodness, honesty, and empathy were forces that could quietly reshape it. One evening, the CEO sat in his office, reflecting on the past few weeks. The locket lay before him, and he thought about the journey it had catalyzed, the memories it had stirred, the connection it had inspired, and the small girl whose courage had reminded him of life's truest values. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the locket or the memories, but for the lessons he had learned about human kindness, integrity, and the power of quiet, sincere action. Amina, in her small room at home, also reflected on the unfolding events. She thought about the CEO, the locket, and the ways in which her simple act of honesty had influenced not only him but her own life and her father's. She understood, in a profound way, that courage and kindness were not defined by size or power. They were defined by the intention to act rightly, even when it seemed small or insignificant. She felt a quiet sense of responsibility, knowing that the choices she made could have meaningful impacts on the lives of others. The days turned into months, yet the quiet bond between Amina, her father, and the CEO continued to grow, built not on meetings or recognition, but on shared human understanding. Small gestures, honest actions, and acts of integrity continued to ripple through the office and beyond. Amina became a symbol of courage and honesty, quietly inspiring those around her, while the CEO learned to embrace human connection, empathy, and the joy of supporting others without expectation. Through these subtle, daily moments, a profound transformation occurred. The office became more than a place of work. It became a space where human goodness could flourish, where small acts of courage were noticed, and where connections between people transcended status or wealth. Amina and the CEO, though from vastly different worlds, discovered that the simplest acts, returning a locket, recognizing effort, offering quiet support, could bridge gaps, heal old wounds, and inspire growth in ways neither could have imagined alone. In these unfolding days, both learned something essential, that life's true value is measured not in wealth, titles, or achievements, but in the courage to act honestly, the kindness extended without expectation, and the connections formed through sincerity and care. And quietly, almost imperceptibly, a journey was being shaped, one that would bring hope, understanding, and meaningful change to their lives and the lives of those around them. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Orion Enterprises, casting a warm glow across the polished floors. The office hummed with its usual activity, but the atmosphere carried a quiet sense of anticipation, as if something unseen had shifted the rhythm of the day. For the CEO, this morning felt different. The locket lay on his desk, gleaming softly, reminding him of the journey he had begun months ago, a journey sparked by a small act of honesty and courage from a young girl named Amina. He thought back to the first time she had approached him, her small hands offering the locket, her eyes steady and sincere. The memory remained vivid, a moment frozen in time that had unexpectedly reshaped his life. He remembered the way emotions had flooded him that day, the grief, the nostalgia, and most importantly, the hope that had quietly begun to bloom. It had been a lesson in humility, in human connection, and in the power of simple gestures. That morning, he decided it was time to meet Amina and her father personally. Though he had quietly supported them in the months since, he had done so without seeking recognition. Now he felt that a personal meeting was overdue, not to flaunt his generosity or authority, but to express gratitude and connect as human beings. He asked his assistant to arrange a discreet meeting with them, ensuring that it would be private and comfortable. Amina and her father arrived at the office, nervous and curious. The janitor had been quietly proud of the subtle changes in their lives, the recognition at work, the educational materials for Amina, and the small but meaningful support they had received. Yet he had never guessed the source, assuming it was the result of company initiatives or luck. Amina, too, felt a quiet anticipation. She had no idea why they had been summoned, but carried with her the courage that had once led her to return the locket. The CEO greeted them warmly, inviting them to sit. There was no formality, no sense of hierarchy, just a sincere effort to connect. He spoke first, acknowledging the honesty and courage that Amina had shown when returning the locket. He described how that single act had touched him deeply, awakening memories of his late wife and inspiring him to look at the world differently. His voice carried a quiet emotion, a sincerity that neither Amina nor her father had expected. Amina listened, her eyes wide, as the CEO continued. He spoke about how the locket had reminded him of values that mattered most: integrity, kindness, and human connection. He shared how he had quietly supported them in the months since, not to create dependence or draw attention, but because he recognized the courage and goodness they embodied. The janitor felt a mixture of pride and disbelief, overwhelmed by the sincerity of the man before him. Amina, meanwhile, felt a warmth spread through her chest, understanding for the first time the profound impact of her simple act. The CEO then reached for a small box on his desk and handed it to Amina. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it, revealing a locket that was both beautiful and familiar in its design. "This is for you," he said softly. "A token to remember courage, honesty, and the power of doing what is right, even when it seems small. It belonged to someone very dear to me, and now I want you to have it as a symbol of hope and integrity." Tears welled in Amina's eyes. She held the locket carefully, feeling its weight and the story it carried. She understood the gravity of the moment, not as a display of wealth or authority, but as an acknowledgement of her values, her courage, and her ability to impact lives. She looked up at the CEO, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, sir. I will always remember this." The CEO smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that had become more frequent in recent months. He realized that life's most meaningful moments were often quiet and personal, not grand or public. The locket was not merely a gift. It was a bridge connecting past and present, grief and hope, authority and humility. In that moment, a bond formed, built on respect, gratitude, and the shared recognition of human goodness. They spoke for a while longer. The CEO asked about Amina's school, her dreams, and her interests. He listened attentively as she described her aspirations, her challenges, and the lessons she had learned from her father. He offered advice, encouragement, and subtle guidance, not as a CEO instructing a subordinate, but as a human being acknowledging the potential of another. The janitor watched silently, pride swelling in his heart as he saw his daughter treated with respect, dignity, and genuine care. After their meeting, Amina and her father returned home, the weight of the morning settling in as a quiet joy. Amina held the locket close, feeling a sense of purpose and responsibility she had never known before. She understood that courage, honesty, and kindness were not abstract virtues. They were actions that could ripple outward, touching lives in ways unimaginable. Her father spoke softly, reinforcing the lessons of integrity, compassion, and humility. That evening, they shared a quiet moment together, reflecting on how small gestures had transformed not only their lives but the life of someone else as well. The CEO, left alone in his office, gazed at the original locket once more. He thought about his wife, the memories they had shared, and the lessons she had imparted. Lessons about empathy, human connection, and the quiet power of integrity. He realized that through Amina's courage, he had rediscovered not only the capacity to feel deeply, but also the importance of acting with compassion and purpose. His work would continue, yes, but Now it would be infused with humanity, care, and a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. In the weeks that followed, subtle changes continued to unfold. Amina's confidence grew, her sense of responsibility strengthened, and her ability to impact the lives of others became increasingly evident. She helped classmates, assisted her father, and quietly encouraged those around her, embodying the lessons she had learned through her own actions and experiences. The CEO observed from a distance, proud and inspired, seeing in her the reflection of values that transcended wealth, power, and status. The office, too, had transformed. The quiet ripple of kindness that began with a single locket returned by a child now influenced interactions across the workplace. Employees treated each other with greater respect, offered help without expectation, and recognized small acts of integrity. Meetings became spaces for listening and collaboration, not just strategy and deadlines. The culture shifted subtly but meaningfully, proving that even in places dominated by power and ambition, human connection could flourish when nurtured by honesty, courage, and empathy. One evening, the CEO walked through the office, observing the interactions of his staff. He saw smiles exchanged, assistance offered without hesitation, and moments of genuine human connection that reminded him of Amina's simple act of courage. He paused near the reception desk, watching a young intern assist a visitor with patience and care. He smiled quietly to himself, recognizing that the lessons learned from a small girl returning a locket had extended far beyond the initial moment, shaping a culture that valued humanity above all else. Amina, holding her locket close, continued to grow in understanding and compassion. She realized that life's most profound lessons were often hidden in small, everyday actions: the choice to return a lost item, the courage to speak honestly, and the empathy to understand another's perspective. She felt empowered, knowing that even a single person could create ripples that touched many lives. And she resolved to continue acting with honesty, kindness, and integrity in all she did. The CEO, reflecting on his journey, understood that life was a series of connections, moments, and choices that shaped not only his own path but the lives of those around him. He had been reminded that wealth and power were fleeting, but acts of courage, honesty, and compassion endured. The locket had become more than a memory. It was a symbol of human goodness, of lessons learned, and of the profound impact of small, sincere actions. In the quiet moments of the evening, the CEO and Amina, though in different spaces, shared a connection that transcended distance and circumstance. The locket, once lost and found, had bridged worlds, healed hearts, and inspired a new way of living. Through it, they had learned that courage, kindness, and honesty were not measured by size, age, or status, but by the willingness to act with integrity and care. And so, the story came full circle. A small act of honesty, a locket returned by a young girl, had changed lives in ways that could not have been predicted. It had transformed a powerful man's understanding of human connection, inspired a child to grow with confidence and compassion, and quietly reshaped the lives of everyone around them. The office became a place where kindness mattered, integrity was recognized, and human connection thrived. In the end, the CEO, Amina, and her father discovered the truth that many spend a lifetime searching for: that the most meaningful moments in life are often quiet, simple, and sincere. A locket, a gesture of honesty, and the courage to act rightly had created ripples that touched hearts, healed memories, and inspired a legacy of compassion. Through this shared journey, they learned that life's true value lies not in wealth or status, but in the courage to act with kindness, the wisdom to recognize integrity, and the heart to connect with others in ways that endure. Life after that pivotal meeting continued to unfold quietly but meaningfully for Amina, her father, and the CEO. The office had settled into a new rhythm, one shaped by small acts of kindness, integrity, and courage. Each day seemed to carry a subtle energy, a sense that even ordinary moments could be extraordinary if approached with honesty and care. The CEO had begun to realize that life was not measured by accomplishments alone, but by the connections forged, the support given, and the respect shared. Amina, holding her locket close every day, found herself thinking,